Deep in the Idaho wilderness, where the Salmon River cuts through granite canyons and civilization is just a memory, lived a man who refused to surrender to the modern world. His name was Sylvan Hart, but the world knew him as Buckskin Bill, the last true mountain man in America. While the rest of the country embraced automobiles, electricity, and indoor plumbing, Bill chose a different path. He walked away from civilization in 1932 and never looked back. For 48 years, he lived completely off the grid in one of the most remote locations in the continental United States. No roads, no neighbors, no contact with the outside world except when absolutely necessary. He built his own cabin with hand tools. He hunted his own food with primitive weapons. He made his own clothes from animal hides. He lived exactly as the mountain men of the 1800s had lived, but he did it in the 20th century. This wasn't a weekend camping trip or a temporary escape from modern life. This was a complete rejection of everything the modern world represented. A conscious choice to live as his ancestors had lived, using only the skills and knowledge that had sustained wilderness survivors for centuries. But what drove a man to abandon civilization completely? How did he survive for nearly 5 decades in one of America's most unforgiving wilderness areas? And what can his extraordinary life teach us about self-reliance, independence, and the price of living free? Today, we're exploring the remarkable story of Buckskin Bill, a man who proved that the old ways weren't just history, but a viable alternative to modern life for those brave enough to choose them. My name is Sam, and this is Wild America. Sylvan Hart was born in 1906 in Kansas, but his heart belonged to the wilderness from the very beginning. As a young man, he worked various jobs: ranch hand, logger, trapper, always drawn to outdoor work that kept him away from cities and crowds. But it was the Great Depression that finally pushed him over the edge. In 1932, disgusted with what he saw as the corruption and weakness of modern society, Hart made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He would walk away from civilization completely and live as the mountain men had lived a century before. The Great Escape, Building a Life in the Wilderness, 1932 to 1945. The morning mist rises from the Salmon River as Sylvan Hart shoulders his pack for the last time as a civilized man. Behind him lies everything he's ever known: roads, towns, people, the entire modern world. Ahead lies the most remote wilderness in Idaho, a place so isolated that even the Native Americans had used it only as a hunting ground. He's 26 years old, strong as an ox, and completely determined to prove that a man can still live free in America if he's willing to pay the price. The hike into his chosen territory takes 3 days through country that would challenge experienced backpackers. Hart carries everything he needs to start his new life: basic tools, a rifle, some ammunition, and the knowledge he's accumulated from years of outdoor work. But most importantly, he carries an unshakable belief that the old ways are better than the new ways. His destination is a remote canyon along the Salmon River, so far from civilization that the nearest road is more than 20 miles away through some of the roughest country in Idaho. The canyon walls rise nearly vertical on both sides, creating a natural fortress that will protect him from the outside world. A small creek provides fresh water year-round. The river offers fish. The surrounding mountains are full of game. It's perfect if you have the skills to survive there. Hart's first priority is shelter. Using only hand tools, an axe, a saw, and basic carpentry equipment, he begins construction of what will become his home for the next 4 decades. The cabin he builds isn't a crude survival shelter, but a sophisticated structure that demonstrates his understanding of wilderness construction principles we've explored in videos like How to Build the Perfect Frontier Cabin. The foundation is built from local stone, carefully fitted without mortar, but engineered to support the weight of heavy log walls. The logs themselves are selected from standing dead timber that Hart cuts, shapes, and fits using traditional joinery techniques that require no nails or modern fasteners. Every joint is cut by hand with precision that would impress professional carpenters. The roof construction demonstrates Hart's understanding of wilderness engineering. He creates a steep-pitched roof that will shed snow effectively, using hand-split shakes that he cuts from cedar logs. The roof overhang is calculated to protect the walls from rain while allowing maximum light into the interior during Idaho's short winter days. But the real genius of Hart's cabin design is in the details that make wilderness living comfortable. He builds a massive stone fireplace that provides both heating and cooking capability, with a chimney design that draws perfectly and never smokes up the interior. The interior layout maximizes space efficiency while providing storage for the supplies and equipment that wilderness living requires. The cabin construction takes Hart most of his first year, but when it's finished, he has created a home that will shelter him through 48 Idaho winters. More importantly, he has proven to himself that he possesses the skills necessary to create civilization from nothing but forest materials and hand tools. With shelter secured, Hart turns his attention to the other necessities of wilderness survival. Food procurement becomes his primary focus, and he approaches it with the systematic thoroughness that characterizes everything he does. He's not just trying to survive, he's trying to create a sustainable lifestyle that can continue indefinitely. Hart's hunting strategy combines traditional methods with practical efficiency. He uses firearms when necessary, but he also masters primitive hunting techniques that don't depend on manufactured ammunition. He learns to construct deadfall traps, snares, and other devices that can provide protein without requiring supplies from the outside world. His fishing techniques demonstrate the same blend of traditional and practical approaches. He uses conventional fishing equipment when he has it, but he also learns to construct fish traps, weirs, and other devices that can provide fish reliably without depending on manufactured tackle that might break or wear out. But Hart's real innovation is in food preservation. Living alone in a remote location, he can't afford to waste any food that he procures. He masters smoking, drying, and other preservation techniques that allow him to store meat for months without refrigeration. His food preservation methods are so effective that he never experiences the starvation periods that killed many historical mountain men. The clothing challenge forces Hart to develop skills that few modern Americans possess. Store-bought clothing doesn't last long under the demands of wilderness living, and Hart is too far from civilization to replace worn-out garments easily. His solution is to learn traditional hide tanning and clothing construction techniques that allow him to create durable clothing from the animals he hunts. Hart's buckskin clothing becomes his trademark, but it's not just a fashion statement. It's a practical solution to the clothing challenges of wilderness living. Properly tanned buckskin is incredibly durable, comfortable in both hot and cold weather, and can be repaired easily using materials that are always available in the wilderness. The tanning process Hart masters is labor-intensive but produces leather that's superior to most commercial products. He uses traditional brain tanning techniques that create soft, flexible leather that doesn't stiffen when it gets wet. The process takes weeks for each hide, but the results justify the effort. By 1940, Hart has created a completely self-sufficient lifestyle that proves the viability of traditional wilderness living. He has adequate shelter, reliable food sources, durable clothing, and all the tools and equipment necessary for indefinite wilderness survival. More importantly, he has proven that the skills and knowledge of the mountain men weren't just historical curiosities. They were practical techniques that could still sustain human life in the modern world. The War Years, Isolation and Independence, 1945 to 1960. World War II rages across the globe, but in Hart's remote canyon, the conflict might as well be happening on another planet. While millions of Americans serve overseas and the home front mobilizes for total war, Buckskin Bill continues his solitary existence, completely isolated from the greatest crisis of the 20th century. The war years test Hart's commitment to his chosen lifestyle in ways he never anticipated. Rationing affects even remote areas as government agents search for draft evaders and monitor suspicious activities. Hart's complete isolation makes him a person of interest to authorities who can't understand why any American would choose to live so far from civilization during a national emergency. But Hart's isolation also protects him from the social pressures and economic disruptions that affect most Americans during the war years. While city dwellers deal with rationing, blackouts, and constant worry about loved ones overseas, Hart continues his daily routine of hunting, fishing, and maintaining his wilderness homestead. The war years force Hart to become even more self-sufficient than before. Manufactured goods become scarce and expensive, but Hart has already learned to make everything he needs from natural materials. His isolation, which might seem like a disadvantage, actually insulates him from the shortages and disruptions that affect the rest of America. Hart's tool-making skills reach their peak during this period. Unable to replace worn-out tools easily, he learns to forge his own cutting implements, repair complex mechanisms, and create specialized tools for specific wilderness tasks. His workshop becomes a complete manufacturing facility that can produce anything he needs for wilderness living. The blacksmithing skills Hart develops during the war years demonstrate his commitment to complete self-sufficiency. Using a forge he constructs from local stone and scrap metal, Hart learns to work iron and steel with the skill of a professional blacksmith. He makes his own knives, axe, and other cutting tools that perform better than most commercial equivalents. But Hart's real achievement during the war years is the development of a sustainable economic system that allows him to acquire the few manufactured goods he can't make himself. He develops a network of contacts in nearby towns who will trade essential supplies for the furs, hides, and other wilderness products that Hart can provide. This trading system allows Hart to maintain his isolation while still having access to ammunition, salt, and other manufactured necessities that even the most skilled mountain man can't produce in the wilderness. But the trading is done on Hart's terms. He comes to town only when necessary, conducts his business quickly, and returns to his wilderness home as soon as possible. The post-war years bring new challenges as America enters the prosperity of the 1950s. The country that Hart rejected in 1932 has become even more modern, more urban, and more dependent on technology. The gap between Hart's lifestyle and mainstream American life continues to widen, but Hart shows no interest in rejoining the modern world. Instead, Hart uses the post-war years to refine and perfect the wilderness lifestyle he has created. His cabin undergoes continuous improvements as Hart adds new features and capabilities that make wilderness living more comfortable and efficient. He builds additional outbuildings for specific purposes: a smokehouse for food preservation, a workshop for tool making, storage buildings for supplies and equipment. Hart's garden development during this period demonstrates his understanding of wilderness agriculture. In the short growing season and challenging soil conditions of his remote location, Hart learns to grow vegetables and herbs that can supplement his diet of wild game and fish. His gardening techniques are adapted specifically for wilderness conditions and require no outside inputs except for seeds. The root cellar Hart constructs during the 1950s shows his mastery of food storage techniques that don't require refrigeration or other modern conveniences. The cellar maintains consistent temperatures year-round and allows Hart to store vegetables, preserved meats, and other foods for months without spoilage. But perhaps Hart's greatest achievement during this period is the development of a complete medical and veterinary capability that allows him to treat injuries and illnesses without access to modern medical care. Hart learns to use medicinal plants, set broken bones, treat wounds, and handle the medical emergencies that are inevitable in wilderness living. Hart's medical knowledge combines traditional folk remedies with practical first aid techniques that he adapts for solo wilderness living. He can't depend on outside help for medical emergencies, so he develops the skills and knowledge necessary to handle any medical situation that might arise. By 1960, Hart has created a lifestyle that is completely independent of the modern world while still maintaining a standard of living that many Americans would envy. His wilderness home has all the amenities necessary for comfortable living. His food security is better than most Americans, and his self-sufficiency is complete in every meaningful way. The legend grows. Fame and controversy, 1960 to 1975. The 1960s bring an unexpected challenge to Hart's solitary existence: fame. As America becomes increasingly urbanized and disconnected from nature, Hart's lifestyle begins to attract attention from journalists, writers, and others who see him as a symbol of something America has lost. The first magazine article about Hart appears in 1962, describing him as the last mountain man and detailing his remarkable lifestyle for readers who can barely imagine living without electricity and running water. The article creates a sensation, and suddenly Hart finds himself famous, despite his best efforts to remain invisible. Fame brings visitors to Hart's remote canyon, and not all of them are welcome. Curiosity seekers, journalists, and government officials begin making the difficult journey to Hart's homestead, disrupting the solitude that has been essential to his way of life. Hart's response is characteristically direct. He posts signs warning visitors away and makes it clear that trespassers are not welcome. But the attention also brings Hart into conflict with government agencies that are increasingly concerned about his complete independence from modern society. Forest Service officials question his right to live on public land. Game wardens investigate his hunting and fishing practices. Tax authorities wonder how someone can live completely outside the cash economy. Hart's legal battles during the 1960s demonstrate the challenges faced by anyone who tries to live completely independently in modern America. The government systems that most Americans take for granted, property taxes, hunting licenses, building permits, assume participation in the modern economy and legal system. Hart's complete rejection of these systems creates legal problems that he never anticipated. The hunting license controversy becomes particularly heated when game wardens discover that Hart has been hunting and fishing for decades without purchasing the required licenses. Hart's argument that he's living as Native Americans lived for thousands of years before there were any hunting regulations falls on deaf ears with officials who see only violations of current law. Hart's solution to the legal pressures is typically direct. He becomes even more isolated and secretive about his activities. He develops techniques for avoiding detection by government officials and creates backup plans for continuing his lifestyle even if he's forced to relocate. But the legal pressures also force Hart to become more politically aware and articulate about his lifestyle choices. In rare interviews with sympathetic journalists, Hart begins to explain his philosophy and defend his right to live independently. His arguments are simple but powerful. In a free country, a man should have the right to live as he chooses as long as he doesn't harm others. Hart's political philosophy, developed through decades of solitary reflection, combines elements of libertarianism, environmentalism, and traditional American individualism. He believes that modern society has become too complex, too dependent on technology, and too removed from the natural world that sustains all life. The environmental movement of the 1960s and 1970s finds Hart to be an unexpected ally. His lifestyle demonstrates that humans can live in harmony with nature without destroying the environment or depleting natural resources. His sustainable hunting and fishing practices, his use of renewable resources, and his minimal environmental impact make him a living example of ecological responsibility. But Hart is also critical of the environmental movement's reliance on government regulation and political action. His approach to environmental protection is personal and direct. Live simply, use only what you need, and take responsibility for your own impact on the natural world. The counterculture movement of the 1960s also discovers Hart as a symbol of alternative living, but Hart has little patience for hippies and back-to-the-land enthusiasts who lack the skills and commitment necessary for true wilderness living. He sees most of the counterculture movement as another form of dependence on parents, government, or society to support their lifestyle experiments. Hart's criticism of the counterculture is characteristically blunt. If you want to live independently, learn the skills necessary for independence and commit to the lifestyle completely. Half measures and weekend experiments don't prove anything except that you're not serious about independence. The 1970s bring new challenges as Hart enters his 60s and begins to face the physical limitations that come with age. The demanding physical work of wilderness living becomes more difficult, and Hart must adapt his lifestyle to accommodate his changing capabilities. Hart's response to aging demonstrates the same practical problem-solving approach that has characterized his entire wilderness career. He modifies his hunting techniques to require less physical exertion, improves his food preservation methods to reduce waste, and creates labor-saving devices that make routine tasks easier. But Hart also begins to think about the legacy of his lifestyle and the knowledge he has accumulated during 4 decades of wilderness living. He starts to document his techniques and share his knowledge with the few visitors he trusts, recognizing that his skills and experience represent a valuable resource that shouldn't be lost. The Final Years, Legacy of the Last Mountain Man, 1975 to 1980. The late 1970s find Buckskin Bill in his 70s, still living independently in his remote canyon, but increasingly aware that his remarkable experiment in wilderness living is approaching its end. Age and the accumulated wear of nearly 5 decades of demanding physical work are taking their toll, but Hart's commitment to his chosen lifestyle remains unshakable. Hart's daily routine during his final years reflects both his advancing age and his accumulated wisdom about wilderness living. The demanding hunting expeditions of his younger years give way to more efficient food procurement methods that require less physical exertion. His trap lines become shorter but more productive. His fishing techniques become more sophisticated and less labor-intensive. The improvements Hart makes to his homestead during his final years demonstrate a lifetime of accumulated knowledge about wilderness living. Every modification serves multiple purposes and reflects decades of experience about what works and what doesn't in the demanding environment of wilderness survival. Hart's workshop during this period becomes a museum of wilderness technology, filled with tools and devices that he has created or modified for specific wilderness applications. Each tool represents years of refinement and improvement, and together they constitute a complete technology for wilderness living that rivals anything available commercially. But Hart's greatest achievement during his final years is the documentation of his knowledge and techniques for future generations. Recognizing that his skills and experience represent a valuable resource that shouldn't be lost, Hart begins to share his knowledge with carefully selected visitors who demonstrate genuine interest in wilderness living. The few people who gain Hart's trust during his final years describe a man who has achieved a level of self-sufficiency and independence that few Americans can imagine. His knowledge of wilderness survival techniques is encyclopedic. His practical skills are unmatched, and his commitment to his chosen lifestyle remains absolute. Hart's philosophy during his final years reflects the wisdom gained from nearly 5 decades of wilderness living. He has proven that the old ways aren't just historical curiosities, but viable alternatives to modern life for those willing to pay the price. His lifestyle demonstrates that humans can live sustainably and independently without destroying the environment or depending on complex technological systems. But Hart is also realistic about the challenges and limitations of his chosen lifestyle. Wilderness living requires skills, knowledge, and physical capabilities that few modern Americans possess. It demands complete commitment and offers no safety net for those who fail to master its requirements. Hart's health begins to decline in the late 1970s, but he refuses to abandon his wilderness home for the medical care that might be available in civilization. His commitment to independence extends to his final years, and he faces the challenges of aging with the same determination that has characterized his entire wilderness career. The end comes in 1980 when Hart, now 74 years old, dies alone in the cabin he built with his own hands nearly 5 decades earlier. His body is discovered weeks later by one of the few people who maintained regular contact with him, ending one of the most remarkable experiments in independent living in American history. Hart's death marks the end of an era. He was truly the last mountain man, the final representative of a way of life that had sustained Americans for centuries, but had been abandoned by modern society. His 48 years of wilderness living proved that the old ways could still work for those brave enough and skilled enough to choose them. "I never wanted to be famous," Hart once told a journalist. "I just wanted to be free, and I proved that a man can still be free in America if he's willing to pay the price for freedom." Hart's legacy extends far beyond his personal achievement of wilderness independence. His life demonstrates that self-sufficiency is still possible in the modern world, that humans can live sustainably without destroying the environment, and that the skills and knowledge of our ancestors remain relevant and valuable. The techniques Hart mastered, the shelter construction, food procurement, tool making, and survival skills we've explored in videos like How Mountain Men Built Survival Bows from Scratch and How to Make Jerky in the Wilderness Like a Mountain Man, represent a complete technology for independent living that doesn't depend on complex industrial systems or global supply chains. Hart's story also serves as a reminder of what we've lost as we've become increasingly dependent on technology and disconnected from the natural world. His lifestyle wasn't just a personal choice, but a demonstration of human capabilities that most of us have forgotten we possess. Today, as we face challenges of environmental degradation, resource depletion, and social instability, Hart's example becomes even more relevant. His life proves that alternative ways of living are possible, and that the skills and knowledge necessary for independence can still be learned and applied by those willing to make the commitment. Buckskin Bill's remote canyon remains much as he left it, a testament to one man's determination to live free and independent in an increasingly complex and dependent world. His cabin still stands, his tools remain where he left them, and his example continues to inspire those who believe that true freedom requires the courage to live differently. My name is Sam, and this is Wild America.